So I think this is the last session before we go break for lunch. And thank you organizers for doing this. Because when I was young, my father used to tell me, isko khana mat do, nahi to padhai nahi karta hai. So lack of attention after lunch. So thank you everybody. The topic we have for discussion here is port congestions or port optimization and container shortages. This has been a plaguing issue for last 3 years or so. It has kind of improved a lot these days, but we'll go into details of what brought this to us, whether it's resolved now, and what do we look forward to. I mean, it's not that it's not going to happen ever again. So let me introduce the eminent panelists here. To begin with, we have Deepak. Deepak is from Maersk. Then we have Tarun Bhai, who's from MSC. We have Devpal Menon, who is NVOCC from Mercargo. And I have already been introduced as the Secretary of Association of Multimodal Transport Operators, but I also wear other hats. Sorry. I am into the business of logistics too. So I'm a freight forwarder, a custom broker. So I bring the 360-degree perspective to the whole thing. So let's begin this discussion, or let's throw open this discussion with Tarun Bhai, because carriers are the first ones to, be questioned on these particular things. So Tarun Bhai, while we understand that, port congestion has a lot to do with container shortage, and we have evidence of that of late. What is your take on it? And let's just roll back, say 17, 18, 19, when carriers were bleeding big time because of the falling, freight rates, and there was consolidation, and there was a lot of change that happened in the carrier business. From there, after consolidation, then we were hit with the C word, which I don't even want to use right now. And there, everything fell apart. And we had severe freight hikes, particularly in ocean. Not that air was any better, but very bad container availability situation that came up. So what is the correlation? I mean, the entire journey. Very briefly, if we can just go back from the time when the carriers was struggling because of, the low freight rates and consolidation, and then coming to after getting this consolidation done, COVID coming in.
Yes, thank you, Arunji, and greetings to all my colleagues and friends from the trade. Yes, you are kind of right that in some of these forums where this is the topic, supply chain is the topic of discussion, and since we are surrounded by supply chain people from the supply chain, and we are amongst the logistics chains, there's a slight difference here. But then, of course, we do stand accountable to answer the concern that you would all have, that in the recent times, or just until about a few months ago, there were glaring shortages, surging freight rates, and whatever difficulties and challenges that one had to face, whoever were the users of the logistic services, especially on the sea freight or even the air freight, I could say to some extent. But then also coming on the point, like you mentioned, that there have been varying cycles that you have seen, which is also a fact of life. That shipping industry has gone through, it's always been behaving in a very cyclical pattern, where it goes from extreme lows, suicidal lows, and goes into highs also. And that is how they are able to sustain themselves. Ultimately, when the times comes to face the low periods, it'll have to be testing time for us who can withstand the vagaries of the rough environment. But anyways, coming again to the topic of specific topic that we have at hand, unfortunately, as we sit on this today's news, which probably flashed in most of the national newspapers, is that there is an excess of containers and the export markets have gone down, which is again unfortunate. But excess of containers is something which is probably not just a reversal of the trend that we are holding or the impression that we are holding in our minds, but it is probably something which is overturned over the last 3 or 4 months. With that, you can well imagine how the economics of our business works. Obviously, as you can see, it's an inelastic industry where the demand, if it goes up, and that is why I was asking question to the last panel that how do we see that because we are also dependent to ensure our supplies basis the demand forecast that we would have drawn up prior or with the certain advance period at hand, will obviously go wrong with sudden surge of around 30% growth that we witnessed in the exports last year, and with all the kind of adverse factors of disruptions which were there confronted by the shipping trade all across the world. So with the inelastic kind of resource and the hardware that we are deployed, it's not possible for us to manage things overnight if the demand goes up. So that was the major constraint. But nonetheless, we did try and address the problem of shortages in the best possible manner that we could. I can speak on behalf of the other shipping lines as well, if I have the liberty from my next seated colleague here. What is a matter of fact is that the shipping lines did bring in a huge quantity of empties from wherever they had the surplus depots. What I could say is about 1.5 million TEUs, 1.85 million TEUs were brought in as empties into the country in the year 2021. Now you can well imagine that this is a round trip industry, just like any taxi or a bus which needs to operate on a round trip basis. Will obviously put a strain if at all there is only one-way traffic. But then this one-way traffic was deficit because after the first phase of wave or the phase of the COVID lockdowns, there was a huge decline in the imports in the country. Earlier also, the exports and imports never had a perfect balance. I mean, that's obviously an ideal situation, a wishful thinking for any logistician. But then in this period, there was a stark deficit of imports, which suddenly resulted after the opening up of the lockdowns in the first phase. The imports had gone down to the tune of around 60%, which used to be more or less surplus in India, if I'm looking at the container trade throughput volumes. But suddenly it began improve, but then later, subsequently, it began improving, and probably the deficit still remains up to about, it has only gone up to improve by about, let's say, to the tune of about 20% below the normal levels, what it used to be prior to the pandemic set in, which means there is still a deficit which has to be filled up for meeting the exports. But the lines did shoulder the responsibility. The carriers, mainline carriers, did shoulder the responsibility. Whoever could source the empties to be supplied to cater to the export requirement. And that is where I'm bringing in this figure of 1.85 million TEUs were brought in as empties. Now, obviously, there are costs attached to that. So the costs have to be passed on. Like Mr. Ramakrishnan always says that there is no free period, there are no free lunches. It always gets factored in somewhere or the other. Hindi mein to it's very simple to explain. Tel to tilon mein se hi nikalna hai.
पर तेल तो बहुत ज्यादा निकाल दिया सर. The question, okay, so Tarun bhai, I think I'll pose this question to Deepak because just to put things in perspective, there was a major constraint on the west coast or on the west coast of US, which is kind of blamed for all this shortages of containers, and it was probably because of the bad handling done by the ports. So this brings us to the second point, which pertains to we are used to battering ourselves for India not doing good on X factor or Y factor. But how have our ports done in this period, and how do you compare them to the global port congestion and port efficiency scenario from the carrier's perspective?
So, thank you for the question. And I think, like Tarunji already covered a lot of points. I'll just add on to what, what has happened. Another factor to the container shortages is that, at least when I started my career, it used to be like, you look at US ports, Europe ports, and, even Far East ports were upcoming. But if you see it today, the worst performing ports in the world are from Europe, from US, especially California-based ports, are extremely poor in handling. And if you talk about, the way we have expanded from only Nhava Sheva to now having ports at every, almost every 400, 500 nautical miles across both the coasts, and ports also doing extremely well. So just as a small statistics, we handle vessels in hours, let's say around 25 hours, 30 hours. We complete our ops, almost same amount of moves, which a port like Long Beach or Los Angeles is taking 5 to 6 days. So it's not a small comparison, right? Felixstowe, Brexit related stuff which started hitting in. The whole new port of London Gateway got its whole lease of life because Felixstowe was extremely crumbling down. The best performing ports, so to say, in Europe is actually Port Tangier, which is not in Spain, which is not in UK, which is not in any of those so-called big geographies. So they have a lot more work to do, and so that's one factor. Second factor is that during the COVID times, in shipping industry and logistics, we are very, before us, the panelists were talking about a lot of demand forecasting issues and stuff. We in this business and the people around it were very used to a drill. January hoga, this quarter one will come, then the Chinese New Year will come, then, the Christmas loadings will start. For imports, the import arrival around Diwali, X days before it's going to start, and you'll prepare, Black Fridays will happen. So the container will, the volume is going to go up. All those forecasting models were catered in. But I think the kind of demand surges which came in during this last 3 years, out of nowhere, suddenly your, demand for garments in US is through the roof. Every carrier is putting in the containers, even then it is falling short. Most of the geographies, and all of you have been part of the industry, so all those traditional calendars of hikes and crests and troughs have all fallen down. When the cargo had to go, it never went. When the cargo never had to go, it was going. So I think these are two factors which I can add as to what Tarunji already said.
So basically it is the port congestion and the turnaround time and the demand surge, three put in together during that COVID time that led to this entire crisis. Is that a good understanding of this?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a finite resource, and the boxes have to be brought in. Otherwise, you will actually need vessels to put the boxes on and then put them on the sea. So it's a movable asset. It has to come back. Like in last 2 years, people also were talking about creating, manufacturing containers. But essentially, it's a network business. All carriers have put in more and more containers, leased containers. But like everyone else said, it has to be brought back, and it's a finite resource. It cannot be increased, and it will not solve. It's a network problem we are in. It's not a one-sided thing which we can solve in this.
Right. Thank you, Deepak. Just to get a perspective of the NVOCCs, carriers are huge, humongous, and MSC and Maersk being top of the line. Let's talk about those carriers who don't own vessels. So for NVOCC perspective, Mr. Devpal, what do you think was the role of NVOCCs in that period or during that shortage of containers time?
Thank you, Arun, and thank you, Business World, for giving me this opportunity to speak here. I've heard some seniors speaking before me, and it is very enlightening to be here. Just coming back to your question, as NVOCC, the term itself denotes, we don't own any vessel. So we are only managing equipments, which is 20-foot, 40-foot containers that you see, and also the special equipments. So during pandemic, the major problem that we faced was vessel space, because we were dependent on third-party vessels for loading. We were not getting space to get the containers moving. Then the other way, if you look at it, the way we increase our fleet size as NVOCCs is we buy containers from China, or even we pick up containers from countries like Malaysia, Thailand, which are seaworthy second-hand containers. The container markets, the prices for containers shot up, so we couldn't increase our fleet size. So whatever, if you look at the NVOCCs, the way they operate, big size NVOCC would today have about 30,000 TEUs to 35,000 TEUs, moving around in a short haul geographic scope of, say, Southeast Asia up to Gulf. Traditionally, this is including the subcontinent, this is the service pattern that we operate. Now, what was happening is, we had the space not getting on the main vessel operator because the carriers were already full with their loading, so we couldn't get it. Secondly, the slot cost, the cost on which we book these containers were almost getting, we were getting into the negotiation table every second week because the prices were going up. Then we couldn't buy new containers to add on. We couldn't bring back the empties which was lying in different ports because be it Jebel Ali, be it Port Klang, be it Singapore, all these ports were, having congestion because of lesser workforce working during COVID. So these were the challenges as NVOCC operators we faced. We had issues in bringing back even empties, but with all the best fleet size that we had, we could still manage to give our customers containers as and when they required. But of course, it was not enough.
So after the first round, can we confidently conclude that as ports, the two parts to our discussion today, one was the ports and their efficiency and the port congestion. As far as Indian ports are concerned, we are good. We are better than the rest. So can we conclude that to eliminate that part, now we'll only focus on the container side. So I think it was a fair decision that while we beat ourselves big time on other issues, ports have done fairly well.
Yeah, maybe if I can comment,
please,
Deepak had already discussed on this. Very fortunately, compared to the other ports, which in the series, starting from, let's say, Ningbo, China, and then followed by the UK ports, the Western UK ports, and then almost like a perpetually lasted congestion at the US Western ports, West Coast ports of Oakland and Los Angeles, which lasted for almost about 6 to 8 months. And compared to those congestions, we were completely free of any kind of serious disruption which took place over there. So I think our ports have done fairly well. I mean, even if we were also facing lockdowns, and we also had certain customs imports restrictions, to observe the safety precautions of COVID and all. But there were no serious very prominent kind of disruptions which were encountered in the flow of the traffic from in and out of the ports. So I think we have to compliment our port
Yes,
system.
I think it needs a big round of applause for our ports who have really done well during this period while everybody around the world struggled on it.
Yes, the robust system.
Yeah.
And there was certainly, we switched over, we were able to, because we had been working on a hybrid system of obviously not so much of electronic mode of transactioning, but we were able to switch over to all that. And perhaps somewhere we had to even compromise on the adequate security. But then I think everybody who was a serious player in this trade took that kind of a risk, and maybe barring one or two stray cases of mischievous elements in the trade, it all went through, and we have been able to overcome and now we have learned our lessons, and probably more of these transactions, the transaction between us, port, and the various other agencies, including customs, the declaration to the customs, or let's say our various processes which involve transactions at various steps between the exporter and the importer. They have now most of the companies are switching over to electronic mode.
Actually,
So that had compelled us. This season actually compelled us to switch over to the electronic mode.
So actually, when we talk of international or international shipping and international air logistics, one thing for sure was custom was super good. They were super proactive. They switched digital instantly. And some of my colleagues here would vouch for it. The clearances were phenomenally efficient, particularly during that time. I'm not saying the same thing as right now, but particularly during that time, clearances were phenomenal. So I think as far as port is concerned, we'll park it as good. We should pat our backs on that and say, okay, let's move on. Coming to container shortage. Now, container shortage immediately, triggered a thought in the mind of a lot of people, including the government, including DPIIT and everybody else involved. Let's manufacture. Now, I don't know. Is that a solution? So, I'm trying to deliberate on whether container ownership should be promoted or container manufacturing should be promoted. There are two different things. See, you can own a container and it could be a bought-on container and it could still be very efficient in the international domain. Or you could say, okay, no, I'm not going to just go for owning. I'm going to start manufacturing it right now. It's a very high capital, very specialized job. It's not like you call 3 welders and they start welding some boxes. It doesn't work that way. So what is your take on this, starting from Deepak?
So see, container, like any other capacity, it's a capacity which you create in the system, whether it is number of rakes for trains, number of trucks which you put in. Capacity addition, of course, is being done in all stages in the logistics industry at various point of time when the demand goes up or goes down or a natural wear and tear happens. Container is also part of the same category. So more important, for example, is that how do we utilize and optimize those assets? So I'll just start maybe with giving a perspective. If we leave apart container for a while, we probably have an extremely wide and very well laid out railway network and very well used for the passenger services. Container nodes are also, I would say, it happens, but there are it happens in a very small pockets. So in areas, let's say between north into Mundra, you will see all those double stacks and everything, all sort of optimization happening on the rails. But I mean, every one of us will agree with the kind of network we have and the capacity which we have in terms of all sort of rakes. A lot of work in terms of the domestic freight movement around rail can still happen. So if someone can say, do we need more domestic containers? I don't know. Do we need more, BCN wagons? I don't know. But at least what we have, are we utilizing that well? Because if you see, you will see a lot of empty containers moving on the road, exempt containers. And at the same time, some truck shortages are there for the domestic cargo. We have a huge coastline, where we are sending cargo from, West Coast, Mundra area up till Vizag. Are we utilizing all of those assets which we already have created? There was a time when things were not there, but we have a lot of good infrastructure, but are we optimally using it? So I think I would put container also alongside that to see that are we utilizing what we have rightly into the network?
Yeah, so my question primarily was, we had this knee-jerk reaction when there was container shortage and the exporters were making a lot of noise about it. Few got involved, few also took it up to a very high level. And there was a knee-jerk reaction from the government saying, make in India. Let's make containers. So is that the solution? Or would you say for exempt containers, I'm only talking exempt containers, I'm not talking domestic containers at all. For exempt containers, probably the first step should be ownership of containers. So let's say Indian enterprise owns a fleet of containers, let's say NVOCC like Mercargo, who is into container leasing, can own containers, and probably those would have somehow complemented or reduced this burden on the mainline carriers when during this time or during such times, let's say in future. So I'll just Tarun bhai, what's your take on it?
Well, this thought was, according to me, is not so great. It's a misconceived idea that to have produced containers domestic, because you are just adding on a drop to the ocean because of the fact that the majority of the international cargo is serviced by foreign shipping lines beyond well over 95%. So once it
think
is
you might-
acquired, once it is acquired by a foreign shipping line, or even let's say an Indian vessel owning company, or let's say a non-vessel owning company, it will only add to just like a small bit into the entire pool of the operation, because if at all it comes with the global shipping player, they don't work on a model of going up and down the same, shuttling up and down the same route. It may just go off anywhere into the scatter into the pool of the rotate anywhere in the world and never even come back. So you can procure the through domestic manufacturing, but then to what extent? It's a separate. It has to be distinguished as a separate industry, which at all, if it is viable over here, we can set up container production plants, container manufacturing plants over here. But over the period last 2 decades or so, whatever 1 or 2 manufacturing units were there in the country, they had gone defunct because of the enormous competition from the Chinese, and I believe well over 98% of the world's container fleet is manufactured in China. They are much more competitive. Just to give you an idea, they are probably about 30 to 40% cheaper. And also, we had difficulties with the procurement of the cotton steel, which is the main the material which is used for manufacturing of the ISO containers. So I think that is like a different thought or a project altogether, which has to be seen in its own comparative economics. So it does not really help in really as addressing the problem of shortage of boxes for the exports from India. And probably we know that because this idea had come about and the government mandated a body like Concord to acquire some fleet of boxes, and that is still underway, just about 12,000. Not 12,000, just insignificant when you compare to the world fleet. And probably that will be retained within Concord is only it has a very limited exposure in the international carriage by sea. It is going to be limited to the domestic carriage. So there is nothing much which has happened, or even this idea would not play out much to address the problem of container shortages.
I'm just going to put my perspective to it. This idea of doing manufacturing of containers, ISO containers in India for exempt trade, in my own opinion, was a ridiculous idea. Before you start manufacturing, you got to encourage container ownership. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but an Indian entity cannot actually own exempt containers. They can, but it will be substantially higher because of the duties and taxes they have paid. And then there is no provision under law for them to send out those containers on an exempt route. This is something very, very strange, but it is a fact. So, Dev, what is your take on this? I mean, on the container manufacturing to supplement this shortage?
See, first thing is that on the ownership which you asked, the ownership will continue because see, we are not shipping lines that we have huge fleets. So what we would look and own it can be buying it as a second-hand seaworthy containers at different far Southeast Asian
But
locations.
can you buy it as an Indian entity, as a Mercargo?
No, it has to
Okay.
be done
It has
as an
to be
offshore.
overseas. It has to
yeah.
be an overseas thing. Okay.
So you buy containers in say Malaysia or Thailand, wherever you get the right price. So that ownership will continue to happen for the NVOCCs. You will also have, leasing companies, which is worldwide big companies. So I don't think leasing companies will go off the business. So that ownership with leasing and second-hand market will continue to happen. When it comes to manufacturing in India, of course, I mean, government had notified Bhavnagar as a hub for container manufacturing, but I don't think really anything has come out of it yet. And of course, it cannot match to the pricings of what the containers which is coming out from China is. Every NVOCC Indian operator today who's got fleet size of more than 25-30,000 containers, they're still buying almost every quarter 600-700 containers from Shanghai. The reason is we cannot probably get the kind of containers manufactured here at the price levels that they can buy in China. So I don't think it is really, I mean, of course, there has been even an article coming out of from the government side where they're saying they're going to have PLIs for container manufacturing to encourage it in India. But I seriously don't know how fast it will happen, because till such time people will continue to source from China.
True. Again, all of this, the shortages, the increase in freight rates, particularly we're going to only talk about ocean right now, because we don't have a stakeholder from the air side right now here. So now, today, the trend has suddenly reversed. We can see a sharp drop in ocean freight charges as of today. I mean, just yesterday I was talking to somebody, and I was told that freight from China, let's say from Shanghai to Navashava, which we were doing at around $5,000, $5,600, or $5,000, $6,000. I was shocked to hear the rates were $750. So it has nosedived, basically. Similar things have been seen on the going west. It's not really dived that bad, but it has nosedived nonetheless. So these changes, the cyclic changes, will probably continue to happen based on demand supply, which is market force. The market force will determine this. But is there any efficiency that can be brought in within the system? Because we were harping about 14% logistics cost in the morning, and every time this 14% comes up, my heart sinks, because this is ridiculously incorrect. And a lot of times government also says the same thing. And I have always opposed it at every forum. And I can very well prove it by their own records that it is not so. And a few of my friends here have read the articles which I've written on this particular subject. But what do you think? I mean, efficiency in terms of cabotage. Like we were talking offline. Cabotage of exempt containers. How easy or difficult is it in India?
Yes, I think this has been the task before all of us who are into the shipping line logistics. Rather, having said that we are into logistics trade, we ourselves, within our organization, we have created another logistics desk to look after the repositioning or the placement of the empty containers from one point to another within the country, from outside the country to in and out of the country as well. So this has assumed a big importance. So that is where the role of innovating, the job of innovating comes about in optimizing the cost for empty positioning. Given the fact that it's an inherent characteristics of our industry, that no point, or no location, no port, no ICD is perfectly balanced. And with more and more ports and ICDs and whatever container storage points mushrooming all across the country, there is tendency of a higher imbalance, because had it been one location, maybe we would have been just affected by the broader macro based imbalance. Let's say if at all we say that the import is lower by 20% than the exports. So which means, okay, one would have to make up for the 20% deficit by, let's say, positioning it from your nearby location, wherever there is a surplus, let's say if it is in Dubai or Africa or wherever. But then another problem is about the intra-region balancing, because it's so many ICDs. Now we have, for me in North India, it's like a challenge for us is to service at least up to about 29 different consumption locations. Consumption could also mean that the drop-off locations where the trade expects us to etc., to receive the boxes if they are coming coming in as imports, and also to provide the boxes, because that is where that is a point which is within the vicinity of their factories. So it's not no longer limited to handful of them. But then that also means that there is going to be the greater magnitude of imbalance at every location, and also which means in turn translates into extra cost for every location. So we try and innovate, overcome the cost barriers by collaborating with transporters who would have their own domestic cargo movement here, and giving them our boxes. But then I have a little difficulty in saying this openly, because this has been the practice of engaging services of the transporters, the local transporters, and and availing of the subsidizing availing of the benefit of subsidy of cost in moving the box. But I have my hesitations, because this is probably not meted by customs, and that is why there is a need for bodies like this or forums like these to raise this point before the government, to at least rectify the laws that they should allow within the duty-free period that the container is allowed to remain in the country. At least they could allow a free movement of the empty box, even if it's not serving the exempt trade. But then ultimately, at some point of time, because if I'm, let's say, there is a surplus of imports coming in Tughlakabad, and my requirement is at a Gurgaon depot. So if I'm moving Gurgaon is a little not so a good example, but let's say if I'm moving the boxes to Muradabad, so I may prefer to, instead of sending this box as empty where I'll be charged full freight by the trucker, I may like to give it to a transporter who has a domestic cargo, and then will be able to shift it within a nominal cost, because obviously he's realizing some recovery, he's realizing some revenue from the consignor of the domestic goods. So that way we share the cost, and then ultimately, give benefit to the export. So ultimately it is serving the export trade, but then the government has to relook at these laws and then give us some flexibility.
Definitely. I think, Tarun bhai, there is a notification on this, and probably the field formations are not aware of it, or there is less of awareness amongst the formation, and we should encourage and pick up these issues at every forum, so that there is more awareness in the field formations, and they don't trouble the trade on this. And efficiency has to be brought in, otherwise we can talk till the cows come home and we'll still not be anywhere close to what
the conflict is, a very fundamental conflict, because when the boxes are brought into the country, there is a bond which is submitted by us at the port customs.
True.
Which says that it will be only used for import, and while it's under the imports movement cycle, and for the export. So that domestic movement part is prohibited.
So definitely we should go back to the regulators on this. It is not just the responsibility of the logisticians, it is also the responsibility of the regulators, the trade overall, to bring in efficiency. And without efficiency, we can keep harping on this over and over again, and we'll reach nowhere. So with that, I think we are running out of our time. So thank you, gentlemen, on the podium. Thank you very much for enlightening us with your views. And thank you for being a patient audience. And if there are any questions, all of us are here. I think we are all here, right? Okay. So all of us are here. We can take it offline, because we'll just keep the timing. Thank you so much.